We now know the first two roster cuts from the Chicago Sky. We're going to talk about that, plus roster cuts from around the WNBA. And Becky Hammon has now responded to her suspension and her thoughts on what went on. We're going to get into all that and more right after this.
Welcome to Chicago Sky Central, and here's your host, Haize.
What's going on, Sky fans? Welcome to another episode of Chicago Sky Central, your number one spot for everything Chicago Sky related. I'm the host here, Haize. You can follow me right off the top at CEO Haize on every social media platform. You can also follow the channel at Chicago Sky Pod on every social media channel. But let's go ahead and get into the content for today. First up, we have, around this time in the WNBA, we're a few days before the start of the season. We know there are going to be a lot of names cut from rosters. And one of the unfortunate things about the WNBA is how you can go from a first-round pick to being out of the WNBA in less than a calendar year. And in this case, Charli Kolar has been waived by the Dallas Wings. This is after being a former number one overall pick. And while she hasn't had a huge impact in the WNBA, we're talking about a player who just got drafted in 2021, and she is now out of the WNBA. And her post after this really brought the feels in, just, saying that God doesn't make mistakes. And, she's probably going to go overseas, find a great career for herself. But we need to start acknowledging how the lack of roster spots around the WNBA not only hurt teams, hurt players, but it also hurts the growth of the game. You really can't get attached to newer players in the WNBA unless they're, even in this case, a former number one overall pick, right? That's out of the league 2 years later. And while she may get picked up by another team eventually, maybe next season, more likely than not, in this case, she's going to go away, go overseas, maybe spend a couple of years out of the WNBA, maybe come back at a later date. And this is part of the problem of growing the game in the WNBA, right? You have women's college basketball that is really at an all-time high, and you can't even get attached to players there that are drafted because they may be gone. And there's a couple of things that go into that. Yes, lack of teams, lack of roster spots. The WNBA roster should absolutely be extended to 14 spots, in my opinion. But when you have players in the W that actually play into their almost 40, it really does take away from growing the aspect of the game with younger players. There just aren't a lot of younger players. If you're not a star immediately, you don't really get a chance to grow your game and develop. And it's unfortunately in this case. Now, she's only appeared in 45 games across the WNBA since she was drafted. And it sucks, right? She started 18 games in 2021, but out of the league now. And it sucks. It really sucks, man. It's unfortunate. Still a talented player. Yeah, hasn't shown a lot, but players just really don't get the chance to develop here at the WNBA, and it's unfortunate. Moving on from that, from a player being cut, in the Seattle Storm, Gabby Williams may be kept from rejoining her team because of the WNBA's prioritization rule. Now, for those that don't know, the prioritization rule is now that players have to return to their teams by the start of training camp, which is May 1st or May 1st, whichever comes first. Comes later, whichever is the later date there. But in the case like Gabby Williams, who actually suffered a concussion and is in concussion protocol and actually is not able to return or fly because of that concussion. Now, the Storm did say that they're waiting on the WNBA to make a decision on if they're going to allow her to come into the WNBA now or not because of the circumstances surrounding her. It's still, the prioritization rule has always been a weird one. There's always been one to see how it's going to be enforced. And in a case like this, I hope some leeway is given to a player that had a concussion and is not able to fly because of that concussion. It's not like she just said, hey, no, I'm not going to come to my team. We'll see what happens on that one. But that is a piece of news from around the WNBA that I also wanted to mention. Now, I dropped an episode yesterday, an emergency episode, talking about Las Vegas Aces and them being fined a first-round pick in 2025, their next available first-round pick. But in that as well, Becky Hammon was suspended for 2 games because of comments she made towards Dearica Hamby. And she came out and said this: I don't recall my relationship with Hamby being anything but on the up and up. And I'm just, obviously, along with the organization, disappointed with the findings. It's never good to have your name be associated with something like that, which is not who you are as a person. That's not how I operate. I did talk to my team. They were great. I have to say they've been very professional throughout this whole process. Now, we didn't expect Becky Hammon to come out and say, hey, yeah, I said that comment to Dearica Hamby. But I think that when you look at the league and the fact that they interviewed over 30 people, they took phone records and everything like that, some people even said, some of you guys in the comments on the YouTube side said that they got off with a slap on the wrist. And I can absolutely understand it looking like that. And so, at the end of the day, the WNBA has to do stuff to protect their players, especially when you hear things as egregious as making fun of a player because of their pregnancy. But it is what it is. Like, Becky Hammond has to deal with that. It is what it is. You have to, you're suspended. It's really going to be no recourse. They felt like they found enough. And, it's 2 games. It's not like it's half the season or anything. The Aces as well is getting fined that first round pick for a team that's slated to be probably in the WNBA finals. It is what it is. And then really, what is finding picks for a WNBA team in which we live in a league in which first round picks aren't even usually on the same roster 2 years after that? So, to say about that, but De'Erica Hamby as well had something to say. She said this: I really don't have much to say about it. I want to move forward and focus on where I am today. I'm healthy and happy. My son is healthy, and I'm going to be playing basketball this season, so I want to focus on moving forward. This part of it is over, and me and the union will continue to explore my options. So, hey, it is what it is. The WNBA PA, the Players Association, said that the penalties towards the Aces were far from appropriate, and considering the league's decision, and explores our options. So, listen, it is around the league. It seems like they're looking at this as not being handled as serious as what it should have been. But, we'll see if anything comes from that. If appeals filed or anything like that, I don't even know if the WNBA bylaws necessarily allow for an appeal to be filed. But enough of the news around the WNBA. Let's get into news for the Chicago Sky. And we unfortunately found out the players with the Chicago Sky that will not be on the roster. And the Chicago Sky announced about 30 minutes ago, as of this recording, that guards Fionda Fitzgerald and Kayana Traylor have both been waived. Now, this is unfortunate for a player in Traylor who had their best game of the preseason in the last preseason game and showed what they could be defensively and offensively potentially for this team. But when you look at the heavy guard rotation for the Chicago Sky, kind of the writing on the wall was always going to be there. And when you look at the game that Parks had as well, yeah, it's unfortunate. It sucks that you can go from getting drafted, albeit in the later rounds of the WNBA draft, but you can go from being drafted to not even on a roster. And considering how tight all the spots are in the WNBA, it's not like in the NBA where you can get waived before the season starts and you could probably find another job. The WNBA doesn't have something like the G League as well or anything like that. It's unfortunate to go from a high in which she was notified she graduated and had her best game in WNBA action only for a few days later, less than a week later, for you to be waived from your team. And, the tough decisions have to be made in that case. I think when you do look at, like I said, that guard rotation and Marina Mabry not even playing in the preseason, it was kind of the writing on the wall that one of the guards, unfortunately, were going to be waived. And that's where we sit right now for Kayana Traylor and the Chicago Sky. They've made their decisions. I think that gets them with the things around Leah Rue as well, not really knowing if she's going to be available. I'm not sure if any more waves are coming for the Chicago Sky. But at least we know now. We know that roster has to get down to the needed number here sooner rather than later. But it sucks, man. It is really unfortunate looking at that's just the ins and outs of the WNBA game, unfortunately. You have players that you can be drafted and it not even matter. And like I said before, when we were talking about this, it's really unfortunate that players in the WNBA really don't get a chance to develop, right? You look at Dana Evans and the fact that she came to the Chicago Sky, didn't play much, was kind of in and out of the rotation, and now is going to have a chance to be a bigger part of it. That's not the typical story. When you look at the WNBA and the lack of roster spots and how long players play into their career, right? We're talking about players playing past the mid-30s and almost into their 40s and still being effective. It really creates an area which teams are so focused on being competitive. Only 8 playoff spots out of 12 teams, and you can convince yourself you are so close to making the playoff. Not convinced. You can be so close to making the playoffs that you go with the veteran talent over young players that may need to develop. And it's unfortunate that we really allow our young players that could develop within systems to go over in Europe, and then we can go back and get them later. Is kind of what is the common mindset around the WNBA. But when you, like I said, you look at the guard rotation, the Sky waived 2 guards. We are very heavy at the guard. So it makes sense, unfortunately. Let me know what you guys think about those 2 players being waived for the Chicago Sky. But let's get into some confusing news before we go for the Chicago Sky. Isabelle Harrison has an undisclosed injury and will not be there for the season opener. She will miss at least the first 2 games. But what makes this situation around her injury so weird is that, I don't know if you guys saw it on social media, her mom actually tweeted that she was awaiting meniscus surgery. Now, Coach James Wade came out and said, he's not going to say anything about her mom. They can ask his mom about Isabelle Harrison's injury and things like that to joke around it. But the fact that that just adds a little bit of weirdness. Now, Coach James Wade did say this about it. I think everything that we said, we want to remain in-house until we have all the information. And that right there doesn't give me much cause for faith. Even saying this, Izzy's out. We want to respect that. She hasn't made a statement, so we haven't made a statement. We're not going to make a statement until we're ready to make one. That's it. All signs are pointing to Isabelle Harrison possibly and potentially missing the whole entire WNBA season. Meniscus surgery is not something that she's going to come back from more than likely this season. The WNBA season is not long enough, and that surgery has enough questions around it. It's super unfortunate, but it seems like Izzy may be out for an extended period of time, and they're kind of waiting until the doctors come back and maybe give a more firm answer and really allowing Izzy Harrison to come out and make that announcement herself. But it doesn't look good. And for a front court that already had tons of questions in that front court, that means we're going to rely even more heavily on players like Morgan Birch, on Elena Smith. We're going to rely even more heavily on those players and maybe even hope that Lee Rue can come back. And when you look at Robin Parks potentially now making the final roster, it makes more sense being in a forward that can come in, stretch the floor. It's unfortunate. I was really excited about what Izzy Harrison could bring to this team, but unfortunately, it looks like Isabelle Harrison may not be available this season, and I would love to be wrong on that. Once something official is announced, I'll be back with an emergency episode for that, because that's news that's really going to affect the Chicago Sky going forward. But that's it. That's my time for today. We are moving forward to the season opener on Friday. I can't wait to that game. But that is it for me. Make sure you're following the show at Chicago Sky Pod. You can send us any feedback, questions, comments, concerns, Chicago Sky Pod at gmail.com or Chicago Sky Central at gmail.com. And then lastly, if you want to leave a text message and or voicemail, the number to do so, 773-270-2799. We are the number one spot for everything Chicago Sky related. And I'll see you guys the next time we go to Skytown. Peace, y'all.
This has been a presentation of the Break Media.